Hi, Zandy. Have you heard this phrase before? It says, sometimes in life, it's not the sharks, it's the guppies, right? I mean, why does someone leave the company or why is morale low on a team? Maybe it's something big, maybe it was a shark, but it's often the guppies. It's the small annoyances that take their toll. Something like a death by a thousand cuts, you know? And I bring this up because I was recently introduced to Charlie Gilkey's latest book. It's entitled Team Habits: How Small Actions Lead to Extraordinary Results. And in this book, Charlie makes a compelling case that it can be little habits, perhaps we're not even aware of, that have the biggest impact on how our team operates. In today's episode, you'll learn why focusing on team habits is so much more effective than thinking the problem is our people. Charlie will help us see how making positive changes to our team culture isn't just the responsibility of the boss, but something we can all be part of. You're going to walk away with practical ideas on how to increase a sense of belonging on your team and even what does that mean? And by the time we're done, you'll be armed with ideas on how to improve decision-making habits on your team. It's a conversation I just can't wait to share with you. Before you hear from Charlie, do you know someone on your team or in your organization that's considering project management certification, or maybe they just want to level up their ability to deliver projects? Well, me and my team of facilitators, we work with organizations around the world each week, helping people do just that. Whether you host a project management course in-house at your company or join us for an open enrollment program, we'd love to help you invest in your team. Learn more at courses.peopleandprojectspodcast.com. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks. Well, let's jump into today's discussion with Charlie about his book, Team Habits. Charlie, thank you for joining us on the People and Projects Podcast.
Andy, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to talk to you today. For all the listeners, I was smiling as you were reading the project management certification because I am a projects guy. I am an operations guy. And I just love the folks out there in the world that can take ideas and goals and pull teams around them and make them happen. So I'm delighted to be here, Andy.
I think you're talking to your people here, actually, Charlie. I think you really are.
Yeah.
We're going to get into ideas in the book, but before we do that, I just love learning sometimes about people's backstory. So can you think of anything from your family culture or early life growing up that helped form how you think about leading in teams?
So I have a couple of cheat codes here, right? One is I grew up in a military family, and so my dad was in the Army, and so from very early age, it's just a way of thinking through getting things done and how to do that with people and how to lead and show up was just a part of who he was, which means it's a part of who I am from a very early age. And then I suppose as a child, I'll double down on that and then join the Boy Scouts. And went through that, which is all about how do you do this stuff, how do you be practical, how do you be useful, but also how do you lead. It's a leadership primer. And then I guess it tripled down on that in that I got selected to go through a lot of the, junior youth leadership courses and things like that. That was just what I did. So for me, Andy, It was a great gig because I was like, what do you mean? I get to get out of class for a day or two and go and lead projects and events and help smaller kids do things. Sign me up, right? And then I just, without really intending to, just those investments in me as a leader in person just kept happening. Went to the United States Military Academy at West Point, decided that wasn't for me, but also joined the Army later. So it's just, you know what? I like this thing. I'm apparently good enough at it that I'm not getting fired from it.
Right.
And so, that's just kind of how it's come. So it's in my blood. I'm a teams guy. I'm a let's get together and make some cool things happen guy. I'm not the person, as much as a lot of people think of authors as just that one person writing in the room and they do all that. And that's part of the job. And I love that piece of it, but I'm not the guy you give Charlie, this is your job and only your job to go do that. I'm like, but what's the fun in that?
Yeah. Well, you had some great scouting stories in the book, but even scouting, if I recall right from the book, it taught you, hey, here's a problem. Let's figure it out. And as obvious as that seems, sometimes in the corporate world, it's like, well, we need to form a committee or we need to whatever. It's like, no, let's actually do something about it. It seems like you've been oriented that way from a young age.
Yeah, it's, I was so blind to that, Andy. It was actually writing Team Habits that I realized how blind I was to it because, I've consulted and coached in organizations for a long time. I'm like, what is it with these folks? And I know that sounds dismissive, but I'm like, There are 3 or 4 people sitting in a room, and they all see the same problem, and either one of them or all of them can solve the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't they just solve that problem? Like, why do we need to set up a meeting to talk about who's going to be on the team, and then a meeting to talk about the plan for doing the thing, and then we go through like 3 months later, whatever the problem was, I call them broken printers, it's still there.
Yeah,
And so I was like, oh,
yeah.
I
And
learned.
we're not even going to talk about meetings, but your section on meetings is I mean, there's math here. And that broken printer for $500 is nothing compared to the price of those people in the meeting. Like I want people to get the book to actually see the math behind that. But there's just so many examples of that are obvious when you read it, but we need to be reminded. And I don't know about you, Charlie, but I was taught years ago that when we're not getting the outcomes we want as a team, it's easy to pin the problem on the people, right? We don't have the right people on the bus. You got to get the right people on the bus. But a big message I took from your book is that we should, start by looking at the team and our habits, that we don't realize that the impact our team habits have on our people and our outcomes. So what are some examples of habits that negatively impact team culture or detract from our objectives?
I love that question. So I'm going to we're going to probably say broken printer a lot. So I'm just go ahead and tell that story.
Absolutely. Yeah, good idea.
So every organization I've ever worked at or consulted with has a broken printer that everyone knows about, right? And it just messes up our days and weeks. Like it has that stupid streak that goes down under the weird paper, or it doesn't print in green or something like that, and everybody knows about it. And sometimes it's been around so long that it's got an employee number. It's like employee number 47. Right. And we just deal with it, right? It's invisible to us until it's not. And to go back to your opening about the guppies, which I really loved, like what we have to recognize is that, motivational science shows this, culture studies show this. It's those small setbacks day in, day out that actually have an outsized impact on our work satisfaction. And so let's think about it. We spend 3 to 6 months on some short-term objective, depending upon the size of your organization. And then there's like that high five moment, like, hey, we did it. And you might get like a good job, Andy. And then 3 to 6 months of working towards that. Good job, Andy. Good job, Charlie. But every stinking day, this printer fools you, or it messes you up, or whatever it is. And so, it's usually a legit broken or literal broken printer. And to your point, Andy, it's typically a 30-minute research project and a $500 decision. That's really what it boils down to, right? And yet it's this insurmountable problem that is just a fixture of our work life. Mm-hmm. And yet meetings are free. We can call a meeting real quick, right? Mm-hmm. They're free in our mental accounting, in our emotional accounting, in our social accounting. We can call that meeting, spend way more time, spend way more dollars, not actually solve the problem, and end up there. So sometimes it's a physical printer and meetings are free, but sometimes it's, to your point, sometimes the broken printer is like the CC thread from hell that we're all too familiar with. Yeah. Which is, I'll just describe it, even though we're familiar with it. We have adopted as a team and as a culture the habit of sending broadcast emails to everyone.
Reply all.
And reply all and get into a chain. And so many people end up spending a significant chunk of their day just reading CC threads from hell to see if they needed to read it. Just to see if they needed to read it. Not alone, like, did they actually call out a tasking in there? Was there any action item? And so we do that. And unfortunately, and here's where I really want to go, Andy, I want to turn the humor into ownership. It's not just that the CC thread from hell is happening to us. We are participating in that. When it's time for us to send the email, we send the CC thread from hell, which means we reinforce this behavior. We basically implicitly say, this is how we do things here. Yeah. And we make the onus of someone opting out so much higher because we continue to participate. And that's one of the things I want to pull out to your point of so many things about team habits. So many team habits, good or bad, are implicit agreements about how we do things. None of us show up at work and opt into the CC thread from hell.
Mm-hmm.
And Andy, I've given this talk to senior leaders of Fortune 500 companies. I've given it, but I asked some of the executives in the room, okay, y'all, which of you mandated the CC thread from hell?
Right.
And no one raises their hand.
No one.
Which of you like this?
Yeah.
No one raises their hands.
Yeah.
Which of you can fix that? And sometimes there's a hand that sort of creeps up. You can kind of see the fingers like, oh crap, I don't want to do it.
Right.
But sometimes they look around the room and like, well, I can't fix that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, if you are the senior executives of this company and you feel trapped by this, what does the front desk receptionist do? Like, how can they look at you and say, no, I'm just not going to do that? You're saying you can't do that. But guess what, y'all? We could change that now.
Right.
We can, one of you or four of you could send out an email and say, hey, henceforth, one, we recognize that this is a thing that we've all done. Two, we want to own that we don't like it, and it's counterproductive to our aims. Going forward, we're going to have some accountability about the CC threats from hell. And here's what to do instead. Here's our suggestion and the responsibility. When it's time for you to send the email, think of the actual people who need to be in that chain. Think of who they might need to communicate with, and start trusting that if you need to be in the loop, you will be in the loop. And if you're out of the loop, we have processes to pull you in the loop. But let's stop spending, everyone in this organization, stop spending 2 hours a day just reading emails to see if they need to read emails.
Yeah, I love it.
So that's an example I can go through. Link
it's a great example. Yeah.
Do what?
Yeah, it's a great example. Here's my thought is it's hard to fix something if you don't see it. And if I remember, you got a PhD in philosophy. Do I remember this?
I do.
Yeah.
Well,
so,
I have a near PhD in philosophy.
All right, let's go with that. All right, but still, you've studied plenty of philosophy.
Yeah.
And my understanding, there's this like philosophical question, does a fish know it's in water? And I'm sure you probably have a good answer to that. But I think a team can be so submerged in our habits, so to speak, we're not even aware they exist. So exactly. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, that's really one of the things that I wanted to do in Team Habits is to give us a way of seeing, but talking about the absurdities of work. Right. Because that's what happens. So much about bad performance at work or toxic performance at work or wherever we want to go. It's just that we've normalized some absurdities. Mm-hmm. And when we normalize in that way, we stop talking about it. We stop thinking like the employee number 47 is just a fixture of our reality.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Why complain about it? Why fix it? It's like, if we see it, it's just there. Like, that's just what's going to happen. Yeah. And so, yeah, I want teams to come together and be able to say, like, is this working for us? Let's talk about it. And Andy, I want to be very clear. When I say teams in the book and in our conversation, I mean the 4 to 8 people that you spend 80% of your time working with. 4 to 8 people, that 50-person team. It's not a team. It's a team of teams, right? It's an organization of teams at best, right? It's typically a group, and there's a big difference between a team and a group. But in those 4 to 8 people, and this is going to become an important point that I'm going to say throughout the rest of the conversation, as long as you'll let me, Andy.
Right.
I want us to make it personal again. And by that, I mean, let's imagine that it's Charlie and Andy and Taylor and John on a team. Right, that's the team, us 4. I'm going to forget those names. So Taylor and John. If we 4 show up and have a terrible meeting, we 4 can look at each other and be like, did that work for you? It's just us 4.
Right.
And if we've done a little bit of belonging work, or if we're honest, Charlie can ask Andy that, and Andy can be like, nope. And then Charlie can say, it didn't work for me. And Taylor's like, yeah, no, not me either. And John can be like, okay, no, it was good. And it's like, okay, what are we going to fix then? Because it's ours. We're going to show up next week. Right? We don't have to do that again. Right? Whether
Yeah.
it's, the way we set goals, right? And we go through this sort of social Sudoku process where we figure out a bunch of random stuff and we make some sort of like estimated guess based upon nothing and also company mandates. And then that's the goal. Sometimes we gaslight ourselves into believing that that goal is achievable, right?
Right.
Sometimes we know, all four of us, Andy, Charlie, Taylor, and John, know that that goal is complete bullshit.
Yeah.
It's something we need to put on paper and talk about, but we know we're not going to do it. We
Mhm.
four can do multiple things. We can say, look, part of our organizational workways, which team habits are a set of workways, and workways are an extension of the sociology term folkways. So you remember
Mhm.
Sociology 101? Folkways and mores are what define culture, right? And so workways are just the work equivalent of those folkways, just things that we do. Like, for instance, if I were to go over to Andy's house, unless I knew that he didn't drink or he, was sober or something like that, it would be customary for me to take over like a bottle of wine or a drink. There's no written rule about that. No one tells you, like, if you go over, this is one of those folkways, right? We have those
Yeah.
at work.
Yeah.
They're a constellation of organizational policies, structure, industry regulations, team habits, and there's some other things we can bake in there.
What I think is interesting about it is I think it'd be easy for someone listening to us say, well, if those senior leaders kind of hesitated, could they make a change? Well, I'm not even one of those. And I appreciate there's a statement you make in the book that I think you said you're either participating in the broken team habits or you're working to change them. It's just one or the other.
Yeah.
And I think if we really understand your idea of, well, it's just the four of us, so what can we control the four of us? We're not going to change the overall culture of the organization maybe, but we can control this, right? So give us a pitch for why this isn't just for senior leaders.
Oh yeah, it's not for senior leaders, and I actually want senior leaders to participate. I mean, they set some of these and they set the tone, but I actually want them to take a step back
Mm-hmm.
because so many of the change management initiatives that senior leaders push forward fail. Right, so many, right, and there's a debate about whether it's 3/4 or what it is, but if you've been in the field long enough, it's a high number,
It's
right?
way too high. Yeah.
It's way too high. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's not working. The change from on high it's not working. So why are we going to go to that as our first tool? Right?
Yeah.
It repeatedly fails. Like, let's do something smarter. But what I
Mm-hmm.
want them to be able to do is to notice, like, oh, there are all these team habits that I participate in, but also that I can have some outsized effect at least naming and creating some space for, right?
Yeah.
But it's really for so it's difficult, and I'm not saying I pulled it off, right? It is difficult to write a business book that is applicable to senior leadership, the management layers, and individual contributors and teammates. It's very difficult to do. And again, I don't know that I pulled it off, but I tried. Right.
Well, you even specifically called out in some sections, like
Yeah.
if you are this, if you are that, So,
Yeah.
so I think you pull it off as well as I've ever seen it, Charlie. I mean, I think,
Thanks.
yeah,
I want the senior leaders of the team to be able to say, you know what, teams, you know what's best for you. I'm going to give you some parameters you have to run in, but how you get this stuff done is really up to you.
yeah,
So that managers can then say, okay, I'm not locked into some way of doing this. And then can go to their teams and not say, okay, teams, this is exactly how we're doing it. I still don't want that. I want those managers to be able to look back and have a little bit of humility and a lot of bravery and say, look, I'm not the only person that can figure out what we're doing here. And I might not be the best person to figure out what we're doing here. I'm the person that makes sure we do the things. I have a certain job here, but I'm not the solution and the solution provider for everything. Let's figure this out together. Right.
so
And so going back to what I was talking about with the goal setting, sort of gaslighting social Sudoku thing, right? It would be helpful if it came down from top that managers can decide more what those goals need to look like.
Yeah.
Right. Sometimes that's not happen. Like, I'm not trying to like presume that this is going to change the world overnight or much anyway, but I do my work. But what we can do as a team is say, look, there's this game we have to play because we all actually like our jobs and we like getting paid, right? But what we're not going to do to each other is pretend that game is the only way that we can be together, and we're not going to beat each other up when that unbelievable, unattainable goal doesn't happen. We're not going to look at each other. Charlie is not going to beat Andy up. Andy's not going to beat Charlie up. And what we might decide to do, regardless of whether it makes sense or not, is decide together. It's like, that's the goal that we need to report. Here's what we think we can do. And we're going to stretch and work our tails off to get this thing that we all believe in. And if we get to that other thing, fine, that'd be great. I hope it's over that. I hope it meets it. But together we can go in and say, here's what we've done as a unit, as a team. And we can show up and work our tails off together in that way. You know what's going to happen? Well, if that corporate goal was unattainable anyways, you're going to have to go through the parade. Everyone knows what I'm talking about. Anyways. Right? But at least with your team, you have signaled belonging and togetherness, and that we can figure it out together. So you can go through that parade together versus going through that parade wondering who's pointing, who's going to point the finger, who's going to throw someone under the bus, who's going to get stabbed today, like who's going to lie, so on and so forth. We don't have to do that to each other.
Yeah.
And that's what I want to say. I'm going to keep iterating that. We do not have to do that to each other. And so the number one rule of being a great teammate, I got to talk about this real quick. It's very simple. It's an extension of the golden rule. Yeah. Be the teammate you want your teammates to be. Pretty simple. That's it. Yeah, right? If you don't want to be on that type of team, be the teammate that behaves that way. So sometimes, I'm not saying you asked me this question, Andy, but sometimes hosts and critics are like, well, Charlie, come on, like really you think this is going to make a difference? Because the whatever happens at the corporate level is going to happen. I'm like, yeah, right. I understand that. I am very immersed in the world of business. And even if Charlie, Andy, Taylor, and John make each other's work life better, if we can show up and we spend 80% of our time together, our work is better. Our work life is better. And it sounds like a tautology, which is something a philosopher would say, but better is better. If we improve our belonging a little bit, better is better. If we improve our meetings a little bit, better is better. And I think most of us, when we sit back and say, okay, what do I want my teammates to be? What type of teammate would I like to be in relationship with? We would pretty much agree that we would like to be in a team where we try to make things better for each other.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so much evidence behind this too. When interviewed Marcus Buckingham about his book, 9 Lies About Work, he said, you can have a fantastic culture at the corporate level, but if it's toxic local, people still leave. But if it's marginal at the top, but it's good, just like you're saying, in this group of 4 to 8, they're going to stay longer. And so it's always local. And I feel like your book is about how do you develop, team habits at the local level, and maybe they'll spill over to other ones. But even if they don't, your 4 to 8 are still in good shape, right? So I feel like, there's so many things that we're going to talk about, or we're not going to talk about in the book because there's just so many of them that are so good. But I thought it was interesting how you said if it's more of a corporate or large company, here's kind of like my go-to. And if it's more entrepreneurial, here's where I focus in on first. Because sometimes it's like, well, where do we focus on? And you have an assessment in the book that I'd recommend that people go through and just, that can be, helpful to get some ideas. But whether it's the larger company or it's the smaller company, belonging is often your go-to. So I'm curious about what you mean by belonging, because that could mean different things to different people. And why is it often the place to start?
Yeah, I love that. Thanks for that question. So belonging is a macro word that includes feeling appreciated at work, feeling like your contributions and perspective matters, that you have moral and functional trust, which you might want to ask me about what's the difference between those, right? And that fundamentally the members on your team have your back, right? I have Andy's back. If Andy's on my team, Andy believes and knows that I have his back, and Charlie knows that Andy has his back. Now, and why that is so important is because it turns out that if you have high belonging, your team can solve almost any problem that comes to them. because they realize that they can spend most of their effort working on the problem, working together against the challenge, versus diverting their attention and some of their attention going against the challenge, but some of it going against their teammates and posturing and understanding that.
Watching over their shoulder. And
yeah, I think if we really take it seriously, and again, and I want to illuminate or at least reveal some of these things, so much of our mental faculties, emotional faculties, social faculties at work are spent in many cultures and many teams just trying to figure out, am I okay with this team? Do I belong here? Can I trust what they're saying? Am I safe? Right? Can I trust my manager? Does my manager trust me? In this next meeting, am I going to get talked over or disrespected or feel like it's a complete waste of my time that I have to show up with? So many people go to work, and that's a good bit of their bandwidth is just spent in that sort of negotiation. And it breaks my heart, actually, because it doesn't have to be that way. And how much treasure, if we would just want to talk about the economics of it, do we just waste because of those things? And what challenges and opportunities do we not get to pursue that really fundamentally matter? Because we're worried about whether what we are in relationship with each other. So belonging is my go-to because, there are two sort of orientations, macro orientations of how we show up with each other. And I learned this from the Gottmans. It's an extension of the Gottmans' work. Read 8 Dates if you're in a relationship. It's perfect, or it's a great book. But I was reading that book and thought, they're talking about romantic relationships, but it's true at work. And so I'm paraphrasing here, but there are some of us who need to feel a high sense of belonging and security before we can do hard and uncomfortable things together. Okay.
Yeah.
And then there are some of us who, once we do hard and uncomfortable things together, will feel that belonging and security. Yes, they're the opposite.
That's actually a good observation. I can see what you're saying. Yeah.
Right. And so this is where like the dreaded trust fall sort of thing and team building things, like we get together. It's like, hi, I'm Andy. I'm John. I'm Taylor. Let's go like jump off some shit together. Sorry. Let's go jump off some stuff together.
Yeah,
right. No, there's some people it's like, I don't know you. I don't trust you. Like, what's going on? I'm not going to do that. And then there are people like, oh yeah, that's totally like, if you catch me, I know I can count on you. Neither way is right. But when we're thinking about our teams, knowing that people might have different orientations allows us in this team of 4 to 8 people to approach that differently. And here's where I have to say, another thing I'll probably stump a lot today on today's conversation, Andy, is the beautiful thing about team habits and what we're talking about here is that it does not have to scale. Because that's a pushback that I get a lot of times. Charlie, that won't scale. Like, we can't scale team habits at an organization. I'm like, duh. But why do you need to? Let's talk about that.
It's not called organizational habits at this point. It's called team habits, doggone it.
It's called team habits, bro. Right? But it turns out, one of the Trojan horses in this book is that while, and I need to say this, I'm not anti-hierarchical in the sense of there are plenty of people who have an anti-hierarchical model and they want to change the governance model. I am at least agnostic in the sense of there's not one right way for organizations to be built. But the more you enable inquiry up and down the levels, and the more you enable people to solve problems at whatever level they are, the less that you end up in just some of the bureaucratic friction and waste that ends up happening because of a strict hierarchy. Yeah, and so I often have to say, like, look, this doesn't have to scale. This has to be Andy, Charlie, John, and Taylor. Right. And sure, I don't know thousands of people's preferences on this one, but I know Andy, if I'm about to ask Andy to do something hard with me, let's do some chit chat. Let's have fun together. Like, let's figure out what's going on. Let me ask him about his day because that matters to Andy. Taylor doesn't care. Right. They don't care they don't care about what happened over my weekend. And I'm cool with that. It's not personal. It's just how they're wired. I'm just going to say, hey, Taylor, here's this really hard problem that I don't know how to solve. Can you help me? And Taylor's going to be like, sure, let's get it. I only have to know this with 4 to 8 people. We can do that. And so belonging is that prerequisite that enables that. And what I'll say here is you can have a team that has good performance in time slices without high belonging. That's possible. You can have a team that performs well enough for periods of time without high belonging. You cannot have an enduring high performance team without high belonging. All right. So it turns out that when we think about this first side of the orientation of let's feel safe together, let's create a relationship before we do hard things, it's helpful to acknowledge that at some point we're going to bump into each other. Where I'm going to accidentally, literally or figuratively, step on Andy's toe.
Yeah.
I won't mean to do it because Andy knows that, right? I'm not going after Andy. I just stepped on his toe. It hurt, and Andy probably doesn't want me to do that again, right? Yeah. But if we can set it up like, look, we're going to do that because we're humans, and we're working in tight quarters, and we're moving fast, and we're going to break some things, and sometimes those things that are broken are toes. How do we come together and acknowledge that we're all going to do that? And what do we do when it happens? That's the getting that set up. But there's this other side of when we do hard things, we bond. Like it also turns out that for reasons outside of work, all of us are going to fall down. We're going to have something happen in our family situation where we drop a project, or we're going to get sick, or whatever happens in this thing called life is going to mean that we are going to fall down and drop behind and drop the ball and oops and things like that, right? And it's going to make our team's life harder when that happens. It won't be personal to any, it's not the same as Charlie stepping on Andy's toe. It's just like, I dropped a thing and it affect everyone. But you know what? What happens when we can get together and say, everybody is going to have their turn to fall down? And it's not going to be a 1-for-1 exchange. I might, Charlie, because whatever I'm going through, I might have 3 to 6 months of just like, I'm not on my game. And we might be able to look at it and say, you know, it's Charlie's turn to be a little bit off, and we got him. But that also means that when it's Andy's turn, we can say, you know what? It's Andy's turn now. It's inevitable that this is going to happen. So it's our turn to take care of Andy in the way that Andy, because there's an exercise that I have in the book around this, has specified that we can support Andy. Yeah. Right? And it's not going to be a 1-for-1. It's not going to be seasoned, but we just have that mindset that we're going to bump into each other. That's on the belonging side, right? And it's not personal. Yeah. It's going to happen. How do we do it? But also we're going to fall down. If we can solve against those two things, no matter the size of the organization, things like we can do a lot together because it takes so much of that overhead, that social overhead of work, and pulls it down. Because I can show up that day, and listeners, to be frank, I had one of those days before getting on the meeting with Andy where I was just, I had some tech woes. I won't go into it, but I was like, man, this is my first time meeting Andy and it's my turn already. Right. But I was also like, you know what? I know enough about Andy to be like, he seems to be a cool guy. I think he'll understand. And there might be some time in the future to where he slips on something. I'll be like, hey man, I got you. For sure. This stuff happens. Yeah. It doesn't corrode a relationship. It doesn't make Andy, maybe, I hope not, question my expertise or authority or can do or whatever. It's just, I was having a moment, you know? Yeah.
Well, especially with you and I in the business of speaking, we could easily say something without realizing that we're bumping somebody. And, you and I didn't have a whole lot of time to create belonging, but I feel like we were able to talk about some shared experiences that you talk in the book about how chit chat is not a distraction. It's actually part of it. And if you and I work together for a while and I'm like, hey, Charlie, I can go around and get some coffee. You want another chai latte is your thing, right? Like just little things like knowing your drink, or little things like, hey, I know your mom's been struggling. Like, how's she doing? Is she out of the hospital? Like, if we have belonging, we can have those kind of conversations. And how'd you say it? When someone stumbles or falls, then we can pick up for each other, right? Because we're in this together.
We're in this together. Well, look, we don't other people who we feel familiarity with.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Right. We don't make enemies out of someone. And even to your point. So thanks so much for pulling in those points, because I want to make belonging habits a habit, right? That we do. Like, it's not, it doesn't just happen, people. Like, there's small things like knowing your team, but It could be like Andy knows that that it might be helpful for me to talk about what's going on with my mom.
Right.
But I might know Andy, I'm not projecting here, but I might say, you know what? I know him well enough to know that like he's in a place with it that it's emotional for him and he's uncomfortable talking about that. So instead of saying like, hey, how's it going?
Right.
I might say, hey, Andy, look, I know you might not feel comfortable talking about it, but I want you to know I'm thinking about how you and your mom are doing and just like I care. And if you ever wanted to talk about it, I'm here, but you don't have to. Just want to let you know that I care.
That's good.
And then Andy could be like, thanks. And then we can go on. Because that might be all that he needed. Instead of me like, tell me how you're feeling. How are you doing? How are you doing in your grieving process? He's like, whoa, that's too much. Like, I'm trying to, like, I just lost whatever I was thinking about.
Yeah.
Again, this does not have to scale to a whole bunch of people, right?
Yeah.
It's 4 to 8 people. We can do this. And we would want those 4 to 8 people to do that for us. That's the other point.
Yeah, Charlie, someone told me this recently that she had a parent in the height of the pandemic who had gotten ill. I think it had some dementia issues, the parent, and it was so overwhelming that this person, a high level person at a company, took a leave. I need the time for my own mental health and to be able to take care of everything. When this person got back to the job, the boss didn't say a single thing. Not, are you okay? What can I do to support you? Not a single thing. And this person who told me this said, if they would have just said a little bit, it's to your 3%, or it's like this little thing. How are you? How can I support you? You don't have to tell me anything more than you don't have to tell me anything private, right? But it's like this belonging, you know what? And this person feels so unattached from that organization just because of that.
Just because of that. And again, you know, when I wrote Start Finishing, I realized it was book 1 in at least a 3-book trilogy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that Start Finishing, sorry, y'all, is my previous book, right? Which is really about how you show up and do your best work by yourself, right? Yeah. How you move those big ideas forward. And I knew the second book was how do we do that as a team? How do we do big and bold things as a team? And then the third one that I'm not sure the shape of how this one's going to be, but it's like what leaders can do to affect this. And even like when I get into executive coaching, I'm like, look, I know you might not know what the hell to do. I don't know what to do, but we know what you can do. And for that person in that scenario is you can be honest and say something like, look, you've been out for a while. We've really missed you. We've missed your presence and what you contribute here. And I'm going to be honest. I don't know what you need and I don't know what to say. I really don't know, but I want you to know that I care. And if you happen to know what you need right now, please let me know. And if you don't, that's okay too. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And you don't have to have the freaking answer. Yeah, right. Right. It's like, you just, you know, I know Mark Manson's book is really popular and I know what's actually in the book is not what's on the title. Right. And so it's the sort of, it's the subtle art of not giving a fork. Right. Yeah. And I'm like, nah, see, at the team's level, I want us to give a lot more care. I want us to care more, not necessarily about the work. Sure. That's great. But about each other. Right. And we don't have to know. And yes, that might be intense for that person coming back in to have their leader say that. I get that. But I would rather over-index on caring. Yeah. Right. And be like, whoa, Charlie was really like, I didn't know how to handle that. That was intense. I wasn't ready for that conversation. Okay. I'm sorry. That was a bump. That's on me. I didn't know what I was doing. Yeah. But I would rather demonstrate through my actions and words that I care about the journey that you've been on, that you're just not some cog and some ghost that can leave and come back and no one says anything. And so, all right, cool. I got some work to do on how to approach that. Yeah. I can hear that.
I love that.
But I'm not going to walk out of this without you feeling that we care and that we acknowledge you and so on and so forth. And that's belonging. You don't have to have the answer, but just, I mean, I know it sounds, all right. So another thing from the book, you know about this, Andy, is I say a lot of this, and there's so many people listening to this, I'm guessing, that are like, yeah, Charlie, we've heard this all before. This is not hard to understand. Right. I've read that in like 18 books. Cool. It's not rocket science. It's rocket practice. Applying this, habituating this, actually showing up and doing it, that's where the hard work, and doing it consistently over time, over and over and over again. So yeah, you probably have heard 4 or 5 things from this conversation where you're like, yeah, I heard it before, bro. Nothing new here. Or I heard it before. Like, you don't understand my team. I don't actually. You do. What are you doing to address those broken printers? What are you doing to show up? And, to your point, I know I've been on this rant for probably about 15 minutes now, so sorry, audience. I'm passionate about this clearly.
Yeah.
When you build that belonging, in the situation you're talking about there, Andy, you mentioned the person's now not attached to the organization. Yeah. Even if someone on her team or a boss would have said that thing, the next 3 or 4 days later, or whenever it happened, and that boss had to ask her to do a hard thing, how much more likely are they to show up and be like, you know what, like, this is going to be tough, but I'm a part of this thing. They care about me and I care about them. So let's figure it out versus, I'm out. Yeah. And we do this. I'm a philosopher. This is going to come up. Yes, I know that I always need to cash this out in the economics of it and retention, and I can do that, right? Mm-hmm. There are plenty of statistics. Y'all know what I'm talking about there.
Yeah.
But what if we operated from just, this is how we want to be together as humans. Yeah. We do it because it's the right thing, and because this is how we want to be together. And oh, by the way, it has these amazing other benefits, right? Because if you do it manipulatively just to get that other thing, it kind of corrupts the gift.
Yeah.
Right? Because as soon as it doesn't suit you, well, then you don't have to do it. As soon as it doesn't solve that key result, then you don't have to do it. Which means the real thing that's not important is not the people you're with and how you're with them, but what you're doing to get the goal accomplished. Is that the type of team that you want to be in? Is that the type of organization that you want to be in? And if not, I'm encouraging you that at the local level, you may not be able to opt out of it completely, but you can add in the human layer. You can add in the emotional layer so that there's this other thing, that there's this other really important game that you and your team commit to playing with each other that will make it less hollow, less transactional, less mercenary, and more like, oh yeah, you know what? Today is going to be a rough day because we have this project that we're getting together, and it's going to be dope to figure out how, with Andy, how we're going to get this done together.
Yeah. And if anyone's ever been part of a team like that, they know what you're talking about. It's special. And I like how Chris Voss sometimes says it's both missionary and mercenary. It's the right thing to do, but it also, it's the more effective and productive thing too, right? So it's like win-win-win. It really is. Yeah. There's so many things I'd love to talk with you about, Charlie, but let's end with this, because people need to get a copy of the book to get all the habits, and from decision making to meetings to collaborating to planning and so much more. We've got a lot of parents who listen to the podcast. I think we have broken printers outside of work.
We do,
so to speak, right? Can you think of any ways, like an idea or two, of how we could apply some of these ideas in families?
I love that question, and I'll try to be brief on this, but everyone's figured out that sometimes I fail at that.
Well, that's okay.
When I was writing the book, I was like, yes, this has the primary business audience and application, but I see this for churches. I see this for little league teams. I see this for schools. I see all different ways that this can apply. And the family unit was a way that I saw it apply. Now, I have to say it with the caveat that the difference in context with the family unit is that you have different players who are not at their peak emotional and mental faculties. Like a 3-year-old is not necessarily the best agent to determine what should happen.
Yeah.
Obvious, right?
Yeah.
However, the similarities are actually quite there, because while they may not be able to decide what to do or how to do it, their preferences might matter still, right? If they really don't like, a certain type of food, then you don't always have to force them to eat that food. Right. And so the habits, the 8 categories of team habits that I talked about, actually apply to every team. They actually apply to every organizational unit, including families.
I
Like,
think so.
we might not think about it this way, but families have meetings,
Yeah.
right? Sometimes it's around the dinner table, right? Families communicate.
We have short codes, right?
They have short codes. They have, they set goals together. They prioritize together, right? They make decisions together. Like, and I'll give a very an example here. Like, my dad, I talked about him being in the Army, but he's like, "Oh, you must have had a lot of rules," and I was like, "No, I had like 3." Right. And those 3 did a lot of work, right?
Yeah.
No, they were very paternalistic, and they're of that era. Is like, 1, do what I tell you to do.
Right.
2, don't backtalk your mom.
Yeah.
And 3, no means no.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. That goes a long way.
That did a lot of work for me.
Yeah.
Right. And so, but there weren't a lot of other macro rules like that. And so I got to make a lot of decisions. Like, is what I'm doing something that Dad has not told me to do before? No, he hasn't told me to do that. Doesn't, and obviously as you age, you're like, don't do dumb things. Okay. What does that mean? Think through it is what he was telling me. Like, think through what you're doing and don't do the dumb thing. Okay. That's a pretty general rule. So yes, you can look at some of the broken printers in your family, and I'll be more specific here, because specificity always helps. So many families have a daily broken printer that's called the getting to school runaround. You know what I'm talking about? Like, there's always some shoes or some keys or an umbrella or a backpack or clothes. There's always something that delays the family by 10, 15 minutes, right? That's the broken printer. So what can we do about it? Well, how do we get things homes? How do we help teach our kids that when things go in a certain place and you think about the next day and so on and so forth, that it makes the whole family's day better, right? Obviously, you can't do that with a 4-year-old. I get that, right? Actually, you can, but it's another matter, right? But that's just one of those things where we come together, and instead of it being mom and dad saying like, okay, here's what's going, or, mom and mom or dad and dad, whatever the arrangement is, it can be one of those things where it's like, hey, y'all, let's take a minute and talk about the stressful part of the day and see what we can do together. And even if it turns into bedlam and it goes nowhere, you are at least teaching the meta habit, which is important, about the same meta habit from team habits of seeing a problem and seeing something that's stressing everybody out and participating and co-creating solutions to solve it. Teenagers are going to rebel. I get the whole journey, but even
do they have a sense of belonging? Do they still have a belonging even as they go through those phases? Right?
Yeah. And so every one of the team habits, you can find family things. Like, how do we take care of each other when we're sick? Right. Like, I am one of those where I don't like people like doting on me. It drives me crazy when I'm sick. Right. I was just like, just mostly leave me alone. But I do like food, right? Whereas my wife loves to be pampered when she's sick, right? And so that's a conversation, right? But it's really that meta habit. Hey, y'all, there's a problem here. We can solve it together. What are your ideas? What might we do? What are you willing to participate in? What needs to happen for you to be engaged in this and creating this solution? Do you see it as a problem? Right. All of those are the meta habit that I would love for us to get across all of our social relationships.
I'm thinking even like the decision-making chapter with the pyramid of the 3 levels. As our kids got a little bit older, sometimes the challenge was, do we still do top-down leadership at home as parents, or do we start, helping them know you can make this call? You can make this call, but let us know. This one, you can't make the call, right? But that applies at home as much as it doesn't work, right?
Yeah, my mom, we had one of those things like my mom didn't care what I was going to do as long as I was home before dark. Okay.
Yeah, right.
But it wasn't, if it's dark, come home. It was, if you're going to be doing something, that let me know what you're doing. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Call. That was back in the day where, you had to pay phone because we didn't have cell phones. Right. Call and let me know what you're doing and tell me kind of what you're doing. And then, okay, we can go from there. But also, no, you can't be out after 10. Get home. Right. That was a level 3 decision, right? I couldn't make on my own, but there were parameters. Right. And so I've learned this from a very early age. And granted, again, I mentioned it that I had the fortune of growing up in a military family. But it wasn't like, I never at a point felt like, oh man, like they're just lording over me and I can't do anything and they're like helicoptering. And it's like, no, like I can call mom and say, hey, I'm staying over Scott's house. I
Yeah.
think, their mom agreed that I can stay over for dinner. Right. And is that a problem? So and so forth. And we'd be like, all right, that's fine. Or she'd be like, no, you spent the last 4 days over Scott's house. You're wearing out your welcome, Charlie, which I do. And so you need to come home. Okay. Right.
uh,
Works out that way.
if you're looking for a fourth book, man, that might just be the one. But let me say this for those listening. I mean, this discussion, we just barely scratched the surface. I mean, just a taste of what's included in Charlie's latest book. If you're ready to start improving habits and outcomes with your team, and that could be at work and at home, get a copy of Charlie's book, Team Habits. I put links to the book and the book's website in the show notes for the cast. So, Charlie, thank you for joining us on the People and Projects podcast.
Andy, thanks so much for having me.